All right, sorry, some trouble with the. Turns out having a connection is important. All right, I am going to keep that alive. I was going to show you a crossword, but we can do that some other time. And uh, we're going to talk about some more of this Mandelbrot stuff, and then connect back to the rich get richer. I know this is exciting. The rich get richer model is exciting, and from Simon and see, how much these to the extent that these things have been tested, which is surprising actually, right? Because you'd think, okay, this is some nice stuff. You did the gamma function thing, you played around with it, all that stuff, and you've had these arguments, and that's a long time ago, so that's fine. The data was it was hard to get hold of data. There's only so many graduate students you could, force into libraries and so on. And this is difficult because you have to record a whole system's evolution and what's connected to what. So becomes a big temporal network problem. So that really did, we needed to invent computers and we needed to get data going and the web thing and so on. And we'll talk some more about that threshold later. But even then, right? So there's still, I think, relatively limited sort of experimental work or empirical work, but it's there, and we'll take a look at it. And then I want to talk about Benford's law, and then we get onto robustness. You know, if you're a pyromaniac, it might be instructional for you, but it's going to be really about risk and that kind of business. With forest fires as a kind of an example. Okay, serious business, of course. What else is in here? Nope. Yeah, the setup notes, which I failed to read. So I just wanted to point out that this paper is alive. This is this kind of ridiculous thing I've spent a long time on. It's really serious, but basically, here's the story. It's got some funny words. So, ousiometrics and telegnomics, right? They're the words here. So ousio is this. The root of that is and these are contrived words, of course, but it means is essence. It's where the word essence comes from in English. It's a Greek word, ousia. It's used in philosophy and talked about in different ways there. In religion, right, in theology, talked about in different ways there as well. But it goes back to a Greek root. Now, we're not trying to say we're measuring what Plato was talking about or whatever. It's a somewhat playful construction, but it is about measuring essence. And I talk about it in the second half of PoCS. And then telegnomics is like far knowledge, right? Telescopes are far sight. So the idea of that is that's the bigger framing here, and it expands from. It's supposed to capture things like Franco Moretti's notion of distant reading, right? Which is that obviously you can't read a million books. Who can read a million books in 10 seconds? But computers can. But of course, they do it sort of poorly, right? So we're trying to get in between those two things and see if we can get a computational or computationally aided reading, if you like, to help us understand large ensembles of text. But the summary here is there's a 70-year-old work that looks at trying to measure meaning of anything, right? So this is kind of an odd thing to do, perhaps, but you're presented with semantic differentials, so rough, smooth, good, bad, and then you have to rate something, like what do you think of this pencil, right? Like, so, there might be a sort of a thin, wide semantic differential, a very basic physical differential, right? So you'd have something to say about it on that. And you might be neutral on other ones, but then you can start to think about words. So the word, chocolate, beauty, all these words, what are they, how do you respond to them? What do you think the meaning is encoded in them? And so there's this sort of almost sneaky way that this comes about. You give people these semantic differentials, they're a little bit abstract, and then you can do factor analysis, right, like SVD. So pull out some linear algebra and figure out which dimensions, which are going to be linear combinations of these semantic differentials, matter the most. And the old story, which is a fine one, but was built out of relatively small studies, done, as far as I can tell, very well. Sort of these old they're put into these old books now, 50s and 60s kind of things. Came up with evaluation, which is like good, bad, potency, which is a kind of a power one, and activity, like how much energy is in something. And so this was sort of, and I'll just paraphrase the rest of it, but basically that was thought to be these sort of three fundamental dimensions of meaning. Like, so things would be evaluated on those even let's think about your emotions, right? You have a fear or anxious or, anger as well, disgust. These are all, in response to something negative, for example. And joy and so on as a response to something that, you're drawn towards it. So we have these sort of very primary, as organisms, we have these kind of very primary response modes that try to map onto what, we're interpreting about something in front of us. And so we're using the map of language as a representation of everything. So that's a sort of a game here. But these were small studies back then. They've been slowly getting bigger ones. The last 10 years have been 10 to 20,000 words analyzed, and in different ways, different kinds of ratings. But this idea that there were these three dimensions that were orthogonal is sort of stuck, and people are very fixed on that. They're very sure that that's true. But of course, now you can just look at it again. You can just say, okay, let's do one of these analyses again. And what pops out is, well, it doesn't pop out. After a lot of struggling, you kind of end up with, and I'll try to show you one of them. This is sort of a fundamental story here. I call these ousiograms. And so here are words, and this is where they live on. This is a histogram, right? So this is just a histogram. There's not a lot of variation because it's a lexicon, right? There's not a lot of variation in color here. But there's a powerful weak axis this way, which comports with these older ideas as well. But what seems to be much more of a dangerous safe one in this direction. And it's more of a compass. So there's a dangerous powerful. This is meaningful. Like if you're a person out here, you might be a dominant kind of person. But things like hurricanes and war, things that are natural disasters are out here as well. So you don't want to. This is not just about people, right? It is about people in the sense that this is our interpretation of things. So it's like northeast matters, right? The compasses matter, and really every kind of degree it changes, right? So if we go out of powerful, we have success and triumph. Those kinds of words are out here. Superpower, superheroes, those sorts of words. So this is real success this way. And the opposite of that is not failure, but void, right? There's just not even anything here. This is nothingness, emptiness. Failure is more around here in the dangerous, weak category, right? So these are bad diseases here. And you can sort of see you go from nothingness to having something, but it being painful, right? Penniless, decayed, expressed, abandoned, bankruptcy is here. And if you're talking about people and characters, these are the chaos agents, right? This is somewhere like Joffrey in Game of Thrones is, and some other characters, right? They're not going to run the world, but they're going to do a lot of damage. They're going to take themselves out as well. Homer Simpson is here, for example. But you go around to here and you start to get to things like, this is death, this is murder, terrible words up here, right? Anger is kind of straight up here. And then as it moves around, it becomes more of a mixture of power. So there's this is a bit ambivalent as to whether it's powerful or weak, right? These are dangerous things, but they're more like one person events. Now we're out to war, right? So this is massive and big, things like volcanoes and so on. Earthquake is here. So these are, but then you get more, war turns into competitor, sort of sports, intensity kind of drifts down. Triumph is here, so that's kind of balanced in terms of danger and safety. And then this is the place to be, right? Generally speaking, this is where the search for happiness, right? If you're pursuing happiness, this is kind of the space to end up in. So all these good things are in here, like wisdom, generous, perfect, cooperation, right? These are all down in this kind of space. And as you go from this kind of more victory, kind of defeating someone else, although it's, like maybe there's someone else you're beating, right? That's a little more clear here with wrestler and competitor or fighting against, but it's also not clear that you're winning here. So this is kind of dangerous winning. This is winning. And then this is more, as it comes down to, angel and peace and softness. These are really, really lovely. This is is it Højge? What is the Danish word for comfort? Is that right? Yeah. It's like, it's basically Snuggies, right? But yeah. So that's kind of all this good stuff down here. Angel is here. And then out this way, these become this is soft, safe and weak. So these are nice, pleasant things. They're not dangerous in any way. Oatmeal is here, for example. So you have to make sense of this, and you kind of go through the middle. Chipmunk seems to have ended up being not really neither here nor there. Depends if you're a baby bird, they eat you. So this is terrible. So it's all in the depends on, but you can see the sort of degree of things as you move through the space. They become more and more mute, and then there's less obvious meaning. Now, this is only 2 dimensions. Of course, there are many dimensions of meaning. Ultimately, we have whole dictionaries full of them, and if you do word-to-vec kind of things, then you're trying to like do every part. It's 300 dimensions, and it's insane. That's really important. I mean, of course, that stuff's important, but this is this is what happens if you boil it all away? What do you get? You boil all the meaning off, and you get down to the most basic stuff. This is sort of the claim of this. And so when it comes to danger, we, again, this is our response systems, for example, like, we might have fear or anger or disgust. We have some resolution. There's sort of more dimensions come off here because we need to know specifically what it is, right? And so this is, I sort of equate this to Jared Diamond's, and I know he's controversial, but Guns, Germs, and Steel idea of the Anna Karenina principle, which is that, it comes from this sort of quote that sits at the top, and it depends on the translation and so on. But it basically, all happy families are the same, and unhappy families are different in their own special ways, right? So things fall apart, and they fall apart in different ways. And this is a big system story, right? Systems kind of holding together need a lot of good things, just working, and then there are ways for it to break. And so that's going to be sort of our robustness piece as well. So we have maybe more specificity when it comes up to here. There is a 3rd dimension in this study, which is structure. And so it's a smaller in terms of variance explained. It comes out this way. So it's like a muffin. It's an English muffin of meaning. So there's a structure one. So there's unstructured and structured. And so unstructured is, if we think about people, it's playful, right? So tickling and comedy and, goofiness are kind of there. Structured is going to be more like corporation and monks and, it's more serious things. Stone, though, of course, is a structured thing, for example. And then you have, there are these corners you can go, like playful danger is, like that's like, bad people in Game of Thrones who like to torture each other. Anyway, giant kind of thing, and then, there's all this stuff. There are enthusionyms and synousionyms, which are antonyms and synonyms, but kind of in essential meaning. It's the opposite of something. Connects to a lot of previous work. We have alignment charts like D&D for fun. Why not? So chaotic evil is unstructured dangerous, right? Which is the Joker, right? The Joker. So, yeah. There's character work, and Julia's working on it, and it's going to be kind of totally amazing when we get that out. But the Joker, Voldemort, and Sue Sylvester are all the same people. Then you can do things like build an ousiometer. This is measuring all of these different things we have, like power, structure, danger here, for example, and these are other different frameworks. But this is for the last year. This is George Floyd's murder, right? Spikes here. We don't have words for coronavirus in this list of words, so it doesn't really pick up properly. We do for our hedonometer, the online thing. And then this is zooming in as you go down here to around January 6th. And so this is the attack on the Capitol. And it's really, the power thing doesn't change much, but it's purely in that danger. The danger goes straight up. So there's a bunch of other stuff. Julie did this. Awesome. And the conclusion has 12 sections. And things like, comparing it to information, right? And so this is important. And this is from Shannon's foundational paper on information theory, which we've just been talking about a little bit here, right? So messages have meaning, right? Of course they have meaning, blah, blah, blah. This is the sort of part of communication is getting one thing to another, right? That you're trying to get meaning from one point to the other. But that's not what information theory is about. It's just getting a message. It's talking about getting a whole family of messages across, but there's nothing in it about meaning, which has always been, I mean, it's fine, but it's always been something that's kind of worried me. Now, do rocks measure meaning of other things? I don't know, but of course, octopuses do, and nematodes, right? There's some signaling they're taking, especially on that danger safety axis. That's a huge axis. Okay, one last thing to say about it is, and I'll just go to the figure. There's a big, ridiculous Twitter thread, but I won't belabor that. So this is then, So all of that stuff was just about a lexicon. So we just have a list of words. So we don't have any weights for them, right? So then you have to, and that's true mostly of these studies in general, like for 70, 80 years. Then you have to say, well, which words are being used in natural discourse? And so these are these same kinds of pictures. They have a similar kind of labeling around, but this is Jane Austen's 6 novels. Most of Sherlock Holmes. There's some copyright stuff. This is 20 years in the New York Times, maybe a year of Twitter. This is talk radio, transcribed talk radio, so it's everything from NPR to, like shock jock type people, I suppose. And that's a snapshot of Wikipedia. And so now what we're saying, well, let's not just make a histogram where it's all flat and each word gets 1 vote. They get votes according to how often they're used, right? So function words are used a lot, right? So they're going to be up the top. This is our Zipf distribution kind of story. And out here, there's close to you can't see it, but that's basically there are 1 billion words in that one. And there are maybe 10,000 words here, right? So the scale varies enormously as you go through. This is obviously a much bigger data set, and people love these words, but there aren't many novels. And Twitter, what the content of that is, well. But what you can see is that all of them have this kind of coloring down the bottom. And so this is something that we sort of suggest as a safety bias, or bias towards using low danger words in just general discourse. All these other negative words are here. They're very salient, but you don't run around saying murder, 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 murder. I mean, you could, but it's going to be a weird sort of interaction with the other humans around you. So we have them. They're very important. It's not about salience, I suppose, but just general discourse. And previously it had been this. It's this. This is kind of the happiness, sadness axis. This is the Pollyanna principle that people tend to interact in positive ways. This goes back to the 30s and 40s studies of people. And we had some work on that for large-scale text. But you can see that that's really a projection onto this goodness axis of what is really a low danger bias. So I've always thought of the Pollyanna principle thing in words in language as a good story, right? So that, social language is our great social technology, right? There's also money. Money is the encoding of belief, which is a crazy thing to have done. Language, of course, we've taken these words out and taken these things out of our heads, put them into words, and we can communicate them. Of course, we put into books, which is incredibly dangerous kind of thing to have done. We're quite happy with it. Much less putting stuff on social media, but just being able to write stuff down and then have someone else's head understand it. It's pretty amazing, right? Anyway, so it's a pretty incredible technology, and but just sort of built into that fabric is that it is a cooperative, integrative, connective thing. Yeah. So may not seem like a feel-good thing, but anyway. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here. There's the paper. There's website madness, which I think is going to be here. There's some stuff on GitLab. Because we're cool people, we use GitLab. That's what they told me. GitLab? Okay. What? I know, we just burned GitHub, I suppose, but Microsoft, yeah. So it's a good question. It's just on the arXiv, which is a big deal for us. We're arXiv people, so it's alive and can be viewed in the world now, finally. No. I mean, some of these, some papers get longer. This is what it needed to be. So we're going to send it. We're going to send it obviously to a journal that can handle that, which isn't, Nature or something, which is 1,500 words, I think. Is that what it is? Science is like 2,500, maybe max. And the tradition there was, you'd attempt to publish in one of the top journals by human whatever, and then you'd have a longer piece somewhere else. But anyway, yeah. The narrative hierarchy. This one's a little further down. So maybe I shouldn't go into that. Yeah. Anyway, I will say personally, the most exciting thing I've ever worked on, and it involved long periods of completely obsessive madness. So I think this is not going to work because I don't. Okay, I'm going to have to stand here. I know that's exciting. Okay, so you guys are on to this. This is the job. We talked about it yesterday. I'm sorry I didn't record all of the office hours, but it's there. And so we'll talk about it some more after this as well. Okay, and let's sort of talk about. So there's some mild suffering. This is where it's it's in the assignment. You figure out that this is true, and in fact, what's really surprising is that this little piece is 0, e to the 0. So you have to kind of I have it in the notes. I think it's in the video too. That's recorded. Some sneaky behavior gets you, some monks who are involved here. So happy to work through that because it is a bit tricky. But this actually turns out to be basically equals 1, which is a little surprising. But this is really a Zipf distribution story, and there's some exponent here. And it depends on the total information content, which is H, and the cost, and this prefactor G, which is a log E2 thing. So that's okay. We actually know this number, but these two we have to figure out, and they might be able to dial up and down. So we have a constraint, of course, which is that this distribution has to sum to 1. And of course, here's what I'm trying to say. So using that constraint, you end up with it sounds better than it is, but you end up with a Riemann zeta function story that has to equal 2. It's really couched in these terms because this is something that might be sitting in your, it is, you shouldn't be trying to compute this thing. It should be a built-in function. So this is a bit of an odd business. You get this 1.73 for alpha once you solve that thing, and this exponent then is 1.58, which is a bit. It's too high, right? So normally this is around. It's close to 1, or maybe a little bit higher than 1, and this is close to 2. So, and it's specific, it has a specific value. It says this is what it should be. So there's a little game in the assignment and it's set up from the start to say, okay, what if the cost function had a j plus a in it instead of j plus 1? Because this was the cost of the space. That's what that was really sitting there. And, it could be just words have some little offset. So maybe we can kind of tweak things a little bit, but that's fine. So that's just a little game to play to see if we can, right? All these things, once we've got a mechanism working and it gives us the right kind of output, right? In the sense that it gives us a parallel size distribution, we're interested in that, or a Zipf distribution, the parallel tail, fine. What happens, how robust is that? And if it doesn't match the real data, obviously we're a bit worried about that as well. So then can we change the mechanic? Maybe. And again, this was this is an incredibly different kind of argument for why this is the way it is, the world is the way it is, because to the rich get richer model, which was a growth model. And again, that's a total toy model. You can mess with it in different ways. But inherent in that mechanism is growth, right? There's something is growing, getting bigger, and there's this encoding of this idea that you get rewards for being, in front. It's your rich get richer kind of phenomenon is built into it in this very simple way. So that's comports with reality, right? That there's growth, these sorts of things are happening. There's no growth in here. There's no dynamic. This is where the thing gets to eventually. The system is just going through. And then all this other work would have to come later. Like, how does the optimization struggle around trying to, how does the system try to keep itself balanced without, falling apart? Which would be sort of reminiscent of thermodynamics, where you have something in equilibrium, and then how does something stay in equilibrium? It relaxes back to that equilibrium state. So I think there are some arguments around this, right? That you could have these states where you're actually a parallel size. The risk looks pretty bad, right? You could have catastrophic events happen with low chance. But in some ways, this can be seen as a equipartitioning of risk, because little things happen a lot and they're bad. And if you add up the damage of those things over time, they're going to be at a similar rate to this catastrophe that happens very rarely. So it's if the sort of cost benefit is independent of the size of the event, then you could say it's kind of in some equilibrium. The problem is, of course, is the catastrophic events could do something that breaks the system outside of it completely. Right? You've burned down the whole forest, and it can't come back from that. Okay. So optimization is clearly kind of happening, right? I mean, we have platypuses, but there's still some sort of optimization going on in all sorts of systems. There's some version of it. It's a difficult thing to do when you get to lots of, to big systems. We've as humans, we've worked very hard to make everything have a dollar amount because that's going to make it easier to, do the things, which is make money. But we really do, and of course, the economists have sort of closed their minds around that. But then there are lots of other pieces, like just, does the thing fall apart? It could be making lots of money for you, but is brittle in some way. What about things like well-being? These are hard things to measure.
I saw like the headline of a paper yesterday. It was like related to kind of like hair products to cause like early death or whatever. But what was like weird about it is that they had all these like monetary costs associated with it. So it accounts for like some like $1 billion in losses because people are dying. Is like what the main takeaway was. Is that like this is important because we're losing money.
Yeah. Look, I mean, once you've entered into the game of just talking about money, it's just going to go further and further. And then it depends what you can measure. So if you can measure like all of this stuff in monetary terms and people kind of agree on it, all this other stuff that's hard to turn into money, happiness or whatever, right? Or Hoiga, right? Like that's gonna, although you can make money out of that, it's it can be left behind, right? And certainly that happens in engineering or planning, and not even just about money. Like, can you just measure something? And so it's like we would like these three things to increase by 10%, and we can measure them, right? But there's all this other stuff that maybe you just can't measure, and it's always good to have a maxim. I think, like it's difficult, like there are hard things for people to like, you know, UVM has its whatever it is, the common contract, or I can't even say what it is. What is it? Common ground, yeah. Which was sort of jettisoned during the pandemic. Some admin people said, "Wow, um, this is amazing." Anyway, but you kind of need to agree what that is. Like Google for a long time, I don't think they have anymore. Was "Don't be evil," right? Which I always thought was okay, but evil, there's like super evil, which is over here as well. It seems like, I mean, I know what I'm trying to do, but you got to be really, yeah. Anyway, but it's good to have a sort of a murkier thing um, to like be good people. Um, all right, so Mandelbrot's actual argument is not like it's really just for language. That's a problem. The definition of cost is a bit funny. If it has to have an alphabet story in it as well. That's okay, but um, certainly at the time, it's a quite ingenious thing to have brought up. But and I say that now, but still, to this day, of course, people sort of are a bit. They just think that was if they know about this, they're like, well, there was kind of a fight, blah blah blah, and it's not clear who won. But I'm going to say that Mandelbrot, that Simon's model seems to hold up the most. This is a splash of stuff. This is from, I don't have the book with me, but he published it in Mandelbrot's pieces, a chapter in a book, and then it has some back and forth, right? Some people respond to it. These are tweets, I suppose. Um, so I thought this was just we're in fact completely without evidence of the existence of any direction of evolution in language. I thought it was a really remarkable statement. It's just randomness. It's just madness. Like it's just, and certainly language goes very playfully in all sorts of things. But then, of course, it's strong. This never works out for people. Um, it is axiomatic that we shall remain so, right? So usually when someone says something will never be done, then that's not right. Um, anyway, so yeah, language develops in what is essentially a purely random manner. I mean, it's randomness. Anyway, I don't know. How do you feel about that?
That seems like fully insane.
Ask Julia because she's a linguistics person. Yeah.
Just like if you started looking at like if you just had a lot of phonemes that are in languages around the world, there's areas that we can't say. Physically we can't produce them well.
Right. We
So
have to work really hard.
so that's
Yeah.
not random. I don't
Right.
that's
Right.
what?
Bodies matter. Yeah. No, that's right. Exactly. That's good. I'll keep myself under control. But I remember when I was a kid finding out that, or hearing this, that apparently Hungarian, the Australian dialect of English, had the most phonemes because we have like diphthongs and triphthongs because you just lean into some way, Australia, you know. You're in a vow, you might as well, you know, go for a ride. It's a lot, you know, it's a long day. It's a long day. You really don't have much to say. Um, but there is, maybe I've said this in class, but there is this, so my youngest daughter had a party the other day, which was a big deal, you know, it was in the backyard because kids, you know, haven't been together. It was a really nice thing. So a whole bunch of them, and she comes in and she is desperate for me to go to the back porch and then say things in my real accent, not whatever this is. Hugely embarrassing. And she managed to drag me out, and I do say a bunch of things. They applaud. But the thing is, I realized this when I first went back to Australia after a few years, was that to be intelligible, I kind of add this extra piece on top, which is like a little vibratory thing at the front end to make it. And I would initially have to talk like Cookie Monster so people could understand my numbers on the phone, because I would say 8 and they have no idea what that is. Um, and no, really, I went for Sesame Street. But so the Australian accent is like down in here. It's like comes from down in here. It's like this is lazy. It's the laziest thing. You're just not even trying, right? And then you have to go at the front to get you.
Isn't there like also a thing too, like when people speak different languages, like isn't there something about like where your tongue like naturally rests, like
Yes.
on your
And you have to work so hard because people don't often talk about that, right? Like you learn another language. No one's talking about what's happening on the inside, but you have to, yeah, put things, exactly. Yes, yes, yes. And the soft palate, like what that's doing. Like I think mine is completely collapsed. Not a good singer. It's true. Like you can make it go up, and it actually is much better. Anyway, but it's a fun experience. It's really interesting, and right. So this is madness. Is the summary. Yes. Um, I mean, this is sort of out of context, but Mandelbrot replied, he's just kind of obviously mad, but something like the logical consequence of the fact that 2 is the least integer greater than 1. That is insane. Anyway, but you can tell by this point they're trying to, you know, own each other. Okay, so um, you could have some balance. Of course, some balance of these things is going to be happening, and maybe other things. And so we'll get to this is the next section. It's really a beautiful thing, I think. Highly optimized tolerance, not the least for its naming. But it is this game of looking at things that have either evolved or been engineered. So you can get these systems that are robust yet fragile, right? They're around for a long time. Things seem to be going well, and then poop. Zipf's, so this is, you know, people coming back to this. This is Raisa de Souza, who's actually we graduated. We were next to each other in the line long time ago. She's at Davis and has done all sorts of things with networks in the last 15 years as well. So, yep. So then there's all this other. This just to give you a little more of kind of what people have talked about, whether they even think this stuff is real. So this is, I think it's George Miller, who was a professor at Harvard, I believe, along with Zipf, and basically said Zipf, this was all wrong, right? This thing is not interesting at all. In fact, if you go there's Zipf had a 1930s book called The Psychobiology of Language, which is amazing. But Miller kind of put an introduction, well, somehow got involved to put an introduction into a reprint of it, and basically says Zipf is no good. But you know, Miller has you know, genes of language, so talks about that. It's interesting. I think Miller also did this, and this is 2010, right? So random text do not exhibit Zipf's. So this is 2010. People are still arguing about whether. And so the framing was this, right? Monkeys typing. That sort of has gone into popular culture in lots of different ways. Like eventually Shakespeare appears, you know, if you have, yep. Chances, of course, are absolutely zero, and it's in Borges' Library of Babel is sort of a similar thing, right? So you're in these hexagonal rooms, going from room to room, and the four sides have shelves. And if you pick up a book, it's just random gibberish. And the idea is it's so big, it's this three-dimensional library that's infinite, that somewhere, there's going to be, Hamlet completely intact, but there's also going to be another room where it's just got one word wrong. You have to think actually about the combinatorics. I don't know if that's really, yeah. Because in principle, I guess that's right. Okay, so there's still some fine. I think Miller also did work on memory of people. I mean, psychology is still whatever, but the stuff people did in the 50s, my God. But this was just about memory, right? So this is the sort of how many digits people could remember. That it was sort of like 7 or 8, and this sort of fed into whether you would have phone numbers, like of whatever. Yeah. Of course, people can remember more if they play around with it a little bit, but this became like drink 8 glasses of water a day sort of stuff. It's just like, this is a truth of humanity. Anyway, this is the introduction, right? So yeah, Zipf was the kind of man who would take roses apart to count their petals. Of course, it's what scientists do, but not all of the roses. Anyway, so, and it basically was some sort of butcher of words, right? So yeah. However, for those who do not flinch to see beauty murdered in good cause, blah 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 blah. But he basically says, he mentions the law of gravity, right? The gravity law, which I mentioned, way back when. And then he has his stuff, and we obviously don't need to go through this, but he's like random sequence thing. This is where he kind of gets. So this is the start of it, and he says basically randomness just produces these Zipf things, and it's not really, monkeys could do it. God knows why monkeys would want to, but anyway, so again, the experiments. But and then it says Mandelbrot's got it all sorted out. And then this last bit. So Zipf was wrong. His facts were right enough, but not his explanations. And he didn't really have an explanation. Oh God. Yeah. So, and please, and it's like this is the intro, and now enjoy the show. Like, thanks, guy. So I feel like I need to. Yeah. Wow. He was kind, like he pointed to some interesting things. Yeah. Wow. But I mean, this is 965, right? He's like, to explore an important new type of probability distribution. 65. These parallels are like Zipf belongs among. Of course, it's going to be men, right? Zipf belongs among white men. Those rare but stimulating men whose failures are more profitable than most men's successes. Just like, and he's been dead for 16 years, and he's just like, I will dig him up and kill him again with the words. What a douchebag. What's that?
There's like things people say about Kafka. Like there's never been a dead man whose failures were so successful.
I mean, yeah. Well, he was right about bureaucracy. Anyway, so this is still going. This is 2001. This is kind of Simon's model is being kind of I mean, there's certain realms where it's well understood and so on, I suppose, at this point in time. But it's being kind of brought back up. It's in the title of this paper, and saying, look, here's how the web was growing, which I realize is what is called the internet now. The World Wide Web. It's not good. Of course, it sits in everything. WW, right? I mean, it's just like let's pick the letter that's the most ridiculous one to say 3 times in a row, especially if you're from Pittsburgh. Which, yeah, I know. I'm sure I said that, but there's WWW. Show Simon's model fares well. So, This is pretty good to kind of dug this up, and we'll see this is connected to this is based on the Barabasi-Albert model for network growth, right? That comes along the preferential attachment story. So this is a modest paper. It's in Physical Review E. It's short, but basically says, look, actually, we can measure the growth rate thing. We can get that little innovation rate kind of story, and connect it and say that that gives us the exponent that we see for right. This is probably the new flavor appears, and this is Alta Vista, which is a primordial version of Google. I talked about them the other day. So it has sort of 6 months, like new pages appearing because it's sort of documented by these search engines, and there's sort of a 1 in 10 chance that it'd be a new page, and then this is this connection, right, from Simon's model, that it's gamma is, or the Zipf, the alpha is just one minus rho, right? This is for Zipf's law. This is alpha sitting here, and that's one minus rho. So that will be about 0.9. But this is for our power law size distribution, that exponent, that 2.1, and that's for the in-link distribution. Right now we have to worry about in-links and outlinks, and they're just quite different. But that was especially back then, this is new data, right? This data has only been assembled, and people are really starting to look at it in the 2 or 3 years beforehand, right? The web comes online in 92. The ARPANET is 69, right? So that's sort of sitting there for a long time. Anyway, so did pretty well with this, actually. So, but that's Simon's one. So that's connecting to some real data. It's like and DeSolo Price basically used this for in the 60s and 70s as well, used Simon's model for networks. Again, something that was just, this is totally fine. There were different areas researching these kinds of things, and we've started to kind of pull them together. So this is more recent, but this, again, it's only the last 20 years that people have had big enough data sets to try and work with things. So this is actually from Linux distributions, from Debian, which was Deb and Ian, right, is the origin of that. It was a couple. I think they broke up. Sad. Debian, I used to use Red Hat back in the day. Okay, so I'm not joking. The first time I had a laptop in 95, a long time ago, and installing, I had this crazy French postdoc that was helping me put Linux on it. And there was definitely a moment where you changed the refresh rate in some file for the screen and rebooted it and hoped it didn't explode. Like, there was a real possibility that it could just kill the screen, So, and then, Stack Exchange didn't exist, right? It was just like this crazy French guy was my sum total of knowledge, and this vague idea that there was this crazy Finnish guy. Linux. This Canadian guy was trying to tell me it was Linux. Anyway, all right. So these are so this is incoming links. This is sort of the idea for this is packages within these distributions, right? So Linux is built like this as packages. They depend on each other. If you've ever played around with that and things go wrong, it's kind of horrible, right? You're in apt-get or something, and sometimes it's great, but it's like it needs 243 new packages, and the whole thing starts to take over your computer. And if it goes wrong, it's like not fun. But anyway, so it's certainly a complex beast of a thing, software for sure. Which leads to, I think, becoming these sort of systems that very much fit into, there's emergent behavior, there's unpredictability, there are catastrophic failures in software. And occasionally, because it's software, you can just start again. And sometimes you're sort of forced to. Apple, I think, has been a good, they did it with their operating system. They basically, in 2000, they put in a Unix guts and just changed, just wiped everything out from before. Windows has sort of done that occasionally, right? But DOS lived under there for a long time. There was always this like hiding inside it was a little beating heart of DOS.
Start again. Well,
Is DOS in there still? No.
The new Windows runs like everything Linux has now.
Oh, it will run Linux stuff?
Windows 11 will run like almost any Linux application.
Wow. Back in the day, they hated it so much, and it was this I have this in stories. It was if you boot it up and Windows would try to take over the whole thing and it would ignore the existence of anything else, right? Linux would boot up and like say, hey, I found all these other operating systems. Which one do you want to start? Because it was a bunch of idiots. But it was very much denial of like, we must kill this thing. Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's good. But that's this idea where you could come along and just wipe it all out because you've made a monstrosity and things have changed. And then simpler things like photos and like iPhoto and iMovie, they're just like gone, and then just start again with a more simpler thing that was actually not as sophisticated. Also, the the United States. Let us start with a new plan, which is sort of holding together. Fun moments yesterday where Georgia basically got rid of or made tenure not really a thing. Function. It's still tenure, but it just doesn't have any of the tenure means to hold, right? From tenure, right? So not so much of the holding anymore. I think you can be jettisoned for lots of reasons. Anyway, that's terrific. So my friend, close colleague at Georgia Tech is like, so that's fun. I do think we need different. It's good to have different parts of society. They're really different, right? They're not all run like businesses. They have different strange things. There are religions. There are the monks are off doing the things, and it's just it makes for a healthier ecosystem. Anyway. So now you can see like as you go from. So this is back with Toy Story. So there's Etch and Lenny. They're named after Toy Story characters. So each release, and they're somewhat apart in time. So you could just see like what are which packages are there? There are new ones. Which ones are they connected to? All ones that exist, they're connected to more of them, and so on. And so this was kind of the idea. This is the number of connections that something would have, and then maybe the increase in the number of connections it had at the next stage. So something that's being connected into a lot already, of course. So this is kind of and these are logarithmic. This is a get richer story. And you expect this, right? That there's going to be a lot of stuff that's not going to work. So all of these had lots of connections. They didn't really have big changes, right? Maybe there should be zeros here as well, but on a log scale, I'm sure there were zeros. They just left them off. But they just got a little bit more of a connection. These are 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s. So that's all going. You expect it to be very messy here, but there does seem to be something that's going on like that. So that is suggestive of a basic get richer mechanism, right? Lots of connections now. You get roughly proportional to that. So it's a roughly linear relationship. It's not. It's proportional. Okay. So and this could be. Excuse me. It's interesting. It's linear. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. It's linear in log space. Okay. So the nutshell for that is it's a get richer models tend to agree, right, with sort of some empirical observations, but there is not an enormous field of work on this. And I should look to see what's more recent perhaps, but even if that was true, the sort of argument that Mandelbrot put forward that this is a system, I mean, if his argument holds, then you are sort of getting for free something that has an optimality to it as well. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. So maybe. Oh, this is really irrelevant, but it's just at the end. I took a lot of these out, but this is good. So this baby robin fell out of a tree many years ago, and it was really high, and there's no way we'd get back up. And my girls were little, and I'm like, this is not going to be good. This is a bad situation. So, but we took them inside, and Sophie, our oldest one, called it Tsubasa, which is Japanese for wing, I think. And climb on. Pratchett is not
Really?
in the picture at all, but like we don't have Pratchett by this
Oh.
point. It would have been a bad situation. There's no question. Yeah. This is a few years ago. Anyway, the extra story here was that so we put in a cardboard box, spread strawberries, didn't know, Google what Stack Exchange feeding for, and I thought this was going to be just a sad situation, but it actually. So you see how round it was? Yeah, it was a little too round, I think, because we did pretty well. But eventually, we'd take in a box outside, and the parents would come back. That was a really nice. So we put it outside. We'd sit there all day with the bird because there were other cats and things and whatever. So we spent a long time, maybe 10 days, I think, and then eventually it would start to fly, and it would just like fly into a fence. It just wasn't a good start to it. But its parents were around during the day. They would feed it, and eventually it took off, right, and it was gone. And about a week later, I heard this because they have quite beautiful melodies and they're creative too. I think Roberts, right? They kind of riff a little bit. Around the side of the house, there was this sound, and I'm like, go around, and then Subas was sitting on the ground. I'm like, oh, this is lovely, right? Our old friend. And then there's a chipmunk, so it's super cute. And then the chipmunk's like a little intense, so I'm like, this is so cute, but still. And then the chipmunk just absolutely assails the bird, and there's like a comical ball of dust and feathers and fur. And I run, and I'm like, no, chipmunk, and who runs away. And the bird flies away, and then I kind of come in and I look out the window, and the chipmunk's like hiding in a hole, just like psychotically looking out. So I Google chipmunks eating, and they do. They're like, I know you think they're cute, but they're evil little monsters. And this is really important. This is the story here. This is really important. Chipmunks are, it's a joke. It's a trick. They're little psychos. Because people don't know. They don't know what to do. If you're from a baby bird perspective, they're up the top. It's a sham. Yeah, I know. The chipmunk in the middle. I don't know. But I remember telling a story, like this. I was sitting somewhere outside. It was like, I think at Shelburne Museum. And there's a woman next to me, and I'm just telling someone here, because it's a story. I'm finished. And this woman next to me goes, I know! And then it starts to has this whole story about chipmunks. It's like, they are, just goes. So I just want you to know. Because I think it's wrong. Okay. All right, I do have a little piece here which fits in very nicely. Benford's law. And so this will connect us to why we shouldn't name things after. Because I know I've alluded to that, but it's in here as well. Pratchett is a bad kitty. Okay, that's what it's doing. All right. So this is a funny, it's called the law of first digits, which is maybe what we should call it, Benford's law. So you've got a bunch of numbers, and just look at their first digits, right? So you do a funny little data analysis thing. Strip off the first digit. Doesn't matter how long the numbers are, just strip off the first digit. What's the probability that the first digit is D? And we could have base B, right? So we're base 10, but we could think of it in, we could transmute it into different bases, and we'd have a different set of numbers. And so there's this observation that it decays like this, that it's log 1 plus 1 over D, that as D increases. So for 1 to 10, because we failed to do the 12, 1 to 10, this goes from 1 to 9. So this whole thing is decreasing. So there's a lower chance of getting 9. This is pretty weird. So this is observed in a lot of different places. So it's about 30% of numbers will start with 1. Not everything, of course. So of course, if we had a random number generator did the right thing, this doesn't work at all, right? You do 10%, 10%, 10%. Well, 11%, 11%, 11%. And you would miss the zeros, right, at the start. So as far as it's understood, there's Simon Newcomb was the first person to see this. This was, I think, because it was a big book of logarithms, and was just like going to the book of logarithms because we're doing the math, right? Because there's no computers. It didn't exist, so you open the book, and apparently the observation was that Muka made was that there are different. If you look at the side of the book, or you look at that it had been opened in different places, like irregular. It wasn't uniformly kind of scuffed through. So it had this sort of weird texture to it. And because of that, sort of thought about it. And then, so that's sitting around. This is a long time ago. There's Benford noticed it in some numbers, and he's a physicist, I think an an astronomer. And so he gets the nod as the person who it's called Benford's law. So this fits into Stigler's law, but often I suppose with Benford's law, it's like, well, it depends. Newcomb sort of has been kind of brought back into the fold. So Stigler's law of eponymy. This is pretty great. Let me make this. So Stigler, whose father was another, I think, won a Nobel Prize in economics. So this is an economist. It's not a bad effort. So Stigler's law is basically everything is named after the wrong person. Right. Good. So this is an important one. So Stigler's, right. So it's that, Pythagorean theorem was known to Babylonian mathematicians, blah, blah, blah. Halley's comment, it's been 240 BC. All these things. The wrong person. So Stigler's law did this. It's very, very enjoyable. Named it after himself, even though he very clearly said Robert Merton told him about this, right? So he should have called it Merton's law, but he did not. So there is, and there's all this sort of stuff. So there's a list of misnamed theorems. That's pretty long, I think. Is that one? No, that's not. There's a longer list. Oh yeah, here it is. Sorry. So, and of course these are the ones. Here you go. So here's Benford's law. Blah blah blah. It's a sizable list of fairy sequence. I worked on it in my masters. Oh yeah. So it should be Cauchy. Huh. Yeah. Fast Fourier transform. Should have been Gauss. Oh, Goodhart's law, which is isn't that the one where Goodhart's law is where someone calls someone? Oh no, that's it. Yeah. Yeah. Measuring things is bad, basically, because you'll end up with people doing bad things. Anyway, list is pretty long. So, what are we doing? Murphy's law? Murphy's law is not there. You're right. Maybe it's because Ort is just an awesome name. So it's definitely true, right? I mean, probably aren't too many Smith. That's kind of rough. You want to, the name has to. Simpson's paradox, Snell's law, Stigler's law. There it is. It's all too much. Venn diagrams, Euler. I mean, so if with Europe, they could basically call everything the Euler and the Gauss thing and then be happy with it. Then Zipf's law, right? So they want to call it Yule or the Eastoop. Anyway, so my thing with this is just don't name it after people. It's stupid. I'm sick of this, like the whole Nobel thing. Nobel is named after, of course, Nobel, who did the money and the dynamite. But it's silly. Like, it's just silly. And if there's supposed to be universal truths, then it would be good to have that in the title. And choose a good title. All right. So anyway, it's a good one. It's a good one. Well done, Stigler. Although we still have to say Stigler. So where does this thing appear? As I said, it's not going to make any sense if it's like a random numbers. That's not going to work, right? If we just made a little random number generated between 0 and 1, and we also thought about the point. If you got 0.03 something something, you'd say 3 is the first number. That should be 10%. But 30, this is a big difference. 30% to 5%. That's a massive difference. So people have observed in lots of different places. This is just take bills. Take tax returns, take death rates, street addresses, numbers in newspapers, just take all the numbers. Fundamental constants. Pretty weird. So any of these little batches of numbers that somehow thematically connected, and again, it's not all of them, but it's found in a lot of places. And so things like tax returns, it's actually a simple sort of analytic kind of check to see if there's fraud, because as we struggle with randomness, right? We're not very good with it, and this is something we would never make up. Too many 17s, right? So we would never make this up. So you want to make sure you got your, if you're faking something with the numbers, you got to make sure that the Benford's law is okay. My colleague, the one at Georgia Tech, who's worried about tenure, did a second digit law, which was fun. Yeah, so this was it's been right similar kind of thing, because the numbers, you look through the set of numbers, and usually from election numbers you'd see this kind of trend. Yeah, and this is going to be 99% voted for Vlad or whatever, right? Yeah.
There's definitely other evidence.
Right, this is our thing that we'll show you, and yeah, sure. Just wheel out a geek. It says, "Wow." Yeah. Oh my God. This is real data. This is from a paper, a 98 paper. So this is the newspapers. This is Benford's law. This is the 1 over 1 plus d thing. Is in blue. This is a terrible plot, but it's here. And so you can, that's the sort of, that can't be right, because that seems to go up. Anyway, but basically they're matching each other. So it's sort of a curious thing that's been floating around. This is a physical constant of the universe. Pretty weird. First digit again. It's not perfect, of course, but this is, wow, it's weird. So there's populations of countries, right? We've got a couple hundred countries, give or take, depending on how things are going, where we are in history, but that's sort of somewhat similar. There's something funny happening with the 3s and the 5s. Okay, so what's going on? So let's just play around with this a bit, and it doesn't matter. You can transform it into a different base, right? It's not to do with 10 either. So this is it's 1 over 1 plus 1 over d, so that's d plus 1 over d. And just separating that is just basic log things, right? So it's log of d plus 1 minus log of d. And so it means that it's sort of we have a uniform distribution in log space. So let's try to think about that. So this is if we played around with this, so if this is a uniform distribution in log space, right? So we've got some quantity x, and we're thinking about it. We're thinking about y. It's really log of x, right? So p of this y dy. That's the probability distribution. So let's just say that it's a uniform distribution, and then we can just mess with the little differential. So this is d log x, right? So that's 1 over x dx. If you just expand this, and there was a 1 sitting there as well. So if that was the case, it's kind of a weird power law distribution. Obviously, this is not normalizable, but what's happening is, it's an extreme case, but of course it doesn't run over all possible values. Benford's law is this kind of story here, so that you have some distribution of numbers, and if you look in log space, it's relatively uniform, at least over some range. So these are the ones, right? So these are numbers starting with 1. Ones back here. These are 100 to 2 numbers. Like 100 to 199, and then 1,000 to 1,999 goes up to here, and then these are the 9s in here. So or the 8s in this case. I guess it's to separate a little bit. So they're the 8s. So that you can see what's happening here, right? There's a shrinking as you go through each log thing, but of course it keeps recurring, right? Because we're the way we do numbers, right? We put a 1 out the front as we click up to the next one, and then we'll click up to the next one. So this isn't a perfect flat distribution, but it is enough over a large enough region for that to happen. And then this is something that might come from a Gaussian, for example. And you can see it's just a different looking object. Now, as to why it would be relatively uniform, all these numbers in log space, it's a good question. It's a good question. This is a ridiculous one. This is a paper. These are citations to articles citing Benford's law. It's based on the number of citations the articles that cite Benford's law get. So, yeah, this is an Abed Nadir kind of thing. And I pointed these out before with numbers. This Benford's law is in this particular radio lab. I've sort of had 2 phases in my life where I listened to Radio Lab and otherwise did not like it. But there are some really great ones. I think it's somewhat short. Okay, so that is Benford's law, and it just sort of it's just a small piece. Just wanted to kind of put it in there for a couple of reasons. But it is definitely a curious one. It's one that you would not. I think that's a odd bit. Okay, so let's look at this thing here. Wow. The goodness there. That's amazing. Okay. So, this is something of a course guide. We've made it our way through here. The next, depends, I may sort of move these around, but this is I have to talk about this next. So these are fundamentals of complex systems. I'm going to talk about emergence, some stuff about statistical mechanics, and I'll get into what I think is a really crucial part for you guys here. So next week, I know I'll talk a little bit about projects as well, because we'll set that up for the rest of the semester. Yeah. Have a few things you can work on. I have over the years developed a whole list of them, but sometimes we refresh the plate. There's no requirement that anything that you work on becomes a paper. It's just it is an incubator for thinking and research, and sometimes they become papers. So yeah.
I think the current assignment still says to submit a draft.
Oh yeah, that's because I didn't take that out. I'm sorry about that.
Don't worry about that, please.
Yeah, don't worry about that. So that'll become more of a thing. I've redone all my assignments and okay, and I'll bring all my pieces in next week. Okay, so that's week 7. 5 weeks to Thanksgiving. It's doable. It's doable. This course is not doable. It's too much. Craziness. All right, another TikTok in the box.